podcast excellence since 2005. This is the King of Podcasts Radio Network, kingofpodcasts.com.
Radio is at a crossroads. In the U.S., we might be heading towards a nostalgic sunset for the airwaves. But in the U.K., they're in a digital dawn. There's more coming up.
The King of Podcasts Radio Network proudly presents the Broadcasters Podcast. Here is the King of Podcasts.
I've been changing up a little bit of the presentation of the program because now that I'm in football mode right now, I listen to a lot of sports podcasts. One of the networks I want to go ahead and shout out real quick that does a really good job of their content is the Locked On Sports Network, the Locked On Podcast Network. A lot of sports coverage, 30-minute programs, and they're so tight on their coverage and everything that they do. And I like the way they do a little opener, little cold opener, go right into the show. It's like they got their setup really good. So shout out to them. I listen to Locked On Bucks, Locked On College Football, Locked On Canes, and I'm trying to on a few others. But like I said, it's a pretty cool network for sports, very grassroots. So if you like it, a lot of good reporters and writers and journalists. So if you're into sports, you might find something in the Locked On Podcast Network that might be something for you. So take a look at that. But don't go there until you listen to yours truly, the King of Podcasts and the King of Podcasts Radio Network, which of course is this program, the Broadcasters Podcast. Then of course there's the Praise and Debaucherous, the Wrestling is Real Podcast, and Podcasters Row. There are a lot of good things coming on in there. If you haven't listened to it yet, there is a episode from Podcasters Row. I'm going to go ahead and rebroadcast during the holiday season with TJ Raphael. She's a writer, an investigative journalist, and a podcast host. Worked at a lot of different great shows out there, and I'm going to have that interview. We're going to roll that back, but I want to go ahead and play that because a great take in the world of investigative journalism and the fact that she's going to be running a new podcast series that's going to be airing on Wondery coming up early 2025. So I'll keep that down the line, but if you want to catch it on Podcasters Row, you can find it right now at kingofpodcasts.com. Just look for the Podcasters Row icon and you'll find it right there. So as you know, the radio aficionado that I am, this is one of those episodes that for radio, I know it's not the medium that everybody really gets all caught up and really interested in, but I can't help myself because I bring up my arguments for American radio stations, for AM/FM radio in the United States, because I remember what it was like to hear great radio and to enjoy it immensely. Because to be honest with you, if radio were still vibrant and successful, and it was the way it was not even 20, 30 years ago, I would still be in the industry. I didn't want to leave the radio industry. The radio industry that I knew and loved growing up was abandoned because corporate radio abandoned us. I have a lot of good friends of mine that were in the radio business and have been outcast. They've been exiled to the beach because they didn't get a chance to go and get somewhere else. And you know what? There's just not any worth staying in the business to do anything because it's not. And it's absolutely horrible to see that it's gone that way, but there's no other way to say it. I don't like the way that radio's gone, and I wish it wasn't this way. I wish I could still have a place where radio was, it's not given this artificial relevance like it does right now, especially for new music, because the Billboard 100 and their methodology has not deviated. Because they went away from the original methodology of 1991. November 1991. Remember, I've told you this. When you saw publicly the Billboard Hot 100 was not the registered chart of record on the American Top 40 Countdown that tells you everything. And for a company like Mediabase to come into light to create a different chart that's not even close to what it's supposed to be, because the Mediabase chart does not represent the real time influence, interest, tastes of the American audience right now. We know that. I've gone through this over and over. And it doesn't change. So tonight, the charts are going to explain everything for me. Because we see where in the UK, which is always the example I'm going to use, sure, it's not as big as the United States, but still you're talking about, 30, 40 million people in the UK, and in the Americas, we got 330 million, right? And I look at the concentration of young listeners that will listen to radio and also listen to streaming and also buy music. And that the musical audience in the UK, and this goes for Europe, this goes for other countries. We can use this for Asia. We can use this for Australia. We can use this for Latin America. Plenty of those still do the same thing. Why the American radio market wants to continue to control what is being put out there is confounding. But we're going to go ahead and explain all this tonight, because this is why corporate radio is failing. Of their own volition or not, this is on them. They chose to do this. And there's stories that have come out that explain a lot of this. Now, there's a story that came out 2 weeks ago that Elias Light, who does great radio articles for Billboard, regularly puts out. And this story, once again, explains a lot of things. The Billboard Hot 100, the top 10 chart that comes out every week. When you look at what they put out there, it has been very stagnant right now as to who is on the very top of that Billboard chart. Because when you look right now, if I had to go look at the moment at what the current chart movement is right now, it's like this. Let's put it like this real quick. The Billboard charts, I look over on Instagram, and regularly I can go and see their Hot 100 chart and see who they have at the very top. So at the moment, for the week ending September 7th, so the week we're actually recording right now. So there are songs that have been on here on the chart that have been on here for, maybe more than 20, 30, 40 weeks. And if I go and pull up Twitter, I can go to Talk of the Charts, and I can see their listing of the methodology that goes behind what the charts say. Now, I'm going to give you the predictions. This is pretty close to what the actual numbers were on the particular chart for Billboard. And here's what we got so far. So your top 10 this week at the moment, Teddy Swims Lose Control. Now, that song has been on the chart 55 weeks. When you look at sales, it has 6,000 units sold. Streams are at 21 million at the right now, cumulative. Radio airplay is still at 51 million. Now, to compare that, the song with the most radio airplay right now, 82 million plays, is Shabuzi's bar song, Tipsy. And that song right now is number one. Meanwhile, sales is at 11,000 units per week, 31 million streams per week. And if I had to go ahead and determine how the point structure goes and how important radio airplay is towards the Billboard chart, I want to say it takes about half of the methodology of the algorithm that comes into play. Now, as for this week, one of the things that's dropped into the Billboard chart is Sabrina Carpenter having a new album, Short and Sweet, that finally now gets charted this week on the charts. And if you look at it, just in the top 25, Sabrina Carpenter has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 songs on that chart. And the song that will have the most airplay right now, if you're looking at the songs that she has currently up there that has airplay, Espresso has 62 million spins of airplay, 46.8 million for Please, Please, Please. The two singles that have come out. Taste is the third, has not gotten started on airplay at all, just very little bit, 4 million so far. But the streaming on the songs, Taste has 42 million, Please, 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 32, 29 million for Espresso. By the way, Espresso's been on the chart 20 weeks, Please, 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 12 weeks. And then other songs on the Short and Sweet album getting between 10 and 20 million streams each. But when you look at that, and if you were to listen over on to any other radio stations outside of the U.S., they're probably playing some of these songs. So Bed Chem, Good Graces, Taste may very well be played, and they are played in other markets, in other countries. I can tell you for a fact that the official chart, when I listened this past Friday, and their chart comes out on Fridays and is dated for that Friday, and the songs that are played on that chart are played immediately on BBC Radio 1. And they're noticed as such that same day. So that morning, official chart lists their top 100 and all their other charts. And BBC Radio 1 plays the top 40 songs, or a choice of the top 40 songs, in an hour, 45-minute time limit on Friday afternoons. So they are so real-time up to the point. And their ratings are very good. And I say, probably are better than what the cumulative ratings would be in radio in this market. Because you know what? When it comes to RAJAR, R-A-J-A-R, the rating system in the UK, or Nielsen here in the US, the ratings are much more forthcoming when it comes to the UK than they are in the US. A part of the fact is that BBC Radio is a public radio station. And then they also show the ratings for private radio stations, because those private radio stations also want to go and compete with the fact that they are in the game. And if you listen to the number of listeners right now that listen to those stations in the UK, they have a competitive top 40 radio market. And there's reasons why. We're going to explain all that. But back to the Billboard chart. One more time. Let me just explain this here. So Not Like Us, Kendrick Lamar, that song has been on the chart now 17 weeks. And the song has 50 million spins of airplay right now. Meanwhile, streaming is half of what the most streamed song is right now, 22 million. And sales is less than the most sold, which is 14,000 for Sabrina Carpenter. So again, the methodology does not play. Streaming does not lead you to the very top, but enough streams exponentially will get you up on the chart and then drop you off. All right. The rest of the chart real quick. Good Luck Babe, Chapel Roan. That's another song that, surprisingly, her song is not giving as much airplay as other songs. So Good Luck Babe is getting half the airplay that a bar song is getting, right? And Good Luck Babe also gets half of the streaming that Sabrina Carpenter gets right now as the top streamer. The top streaming single, put it like that. But yet, she's there at number 8. Could be a little bit higher if streaming were important, but the thing is, Chapel Roan, because of the methodology over in the UK, her song got up to number 3. Not Like Us was, I think, top 6. Lose Control, number 2. It did not make number 1. Now, Lose Control only got 1 week at number 1 after all there was said and done for them, but it still relishes towards the top of the chart at number 10. Still there. And it's been over a year that song's on the chart. Just make that point clear. Die With a Smile, Lady Gaga, Bruno Mars. The reason that is right now doing so well at number 6, put it like this, it's artists that are going to be with radio traction because of who they are. So there is some radio traction already. 18 million streams right now for them in their second week. 31 million streams, 6,000 units in sales. So that's where they're at right there at number 6. But radio airplay could have easily put it up there, but they chose not to. Because radio does what they do. And then you had Some Help, Post Malone, Morgan Wallen, which I think was 6 weeks, number 1. And well, that song, it's 67 million spins of airplay, 28 million streams, 5,000 sales. And then you have the Sabrina Carpenter album bomb that takes 2, 3, and 4. And a bar song that stays up there. It's been up there 20 weeks. Of the top airplay songs that are on this top 20 list, All right. The songs that have, let's say, more than 40 million plays of radio airplay. 13 is Beautiful Things, Benson Boone. That's on 32 weeks right now on the chart. That song hit number one back, I'm thinking, February or March in the UK? And then Too Sweet Hosier, 60 million spins of airplay. That's been on 23 weeks. Remember how we talked many years back? I talked about the 9 to 12 week pause or delay that American radio will pick up on a new song because they want bona fide hits. Corporate radio doesn't want to take a chance on music that they're not familiar with or they don't think is going to have any kind of traction. But then they're showing themselves to be a secondary market, a flea market, I've called that before, because then the streaming numbers, the streaming revenue that comes off of that from the beginning of an album or a single, and then they get a resurgence because American radio then picks it back up as a secondary market, and that's it. And because of Billboard's methodology making it so important, these songs continue to stay in the top 10. So let's look in there one more time. Birds of a Feather, also getting 43 million spins of airplay. It's number 7, 15 weeks on the chart. I Had Some Help has 16 weeks on the chart, 67 million streams of airplay, right? All these songs have more than 12 weeks of airplay before they're allowed to go ahead and get the heavy rotation of airplay on new music radio stations. Notice that. And that's where I constantly talk about this. And Billboard makes a point, and they don't really call out the reason why, but I'm going to call it anyway. Elias Light talks about that more hits debut in the Hot 100, top 10, but they also burn out more quickly. So I help Elias out with that answer. More than 40% of top 10 hits fall out of their position in just after a week. Songs that come in the top 10 over time last longer. So he's going to explain this for us. I'll let him go and do this. And if there's anything that's missing out, I'll go ahead and, add a little more into it. But the thing is that I can already tell you off the top, it's the radio methodology that is affecting this. So I want to see how he tries to experience this. So spring of 2022, he puts an example. In 3 consecutive weeks, Future released I Never Like You, Bad Bunny put out Un Verano Sin Ti, and Kendrick Lamar returned from a 5-year break with Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers. All these albums came out spring of 2022. Future and Lamar launched 4 songs apiece in the Billboard Hot 100 top 10 during their album's debut weeks. Bad Bunny scored 3. Look, Taylor Swift does it with the Torture Poet Society. I'm going to say it right because I said Dead Poet Society one week, and I'm not going to remember doing that again. Sabrina Carpenter now does this with Short and Sweet. An album bomb always gets songs up on the list. Drake used to do it all the time, right? Kendrick Lamar also doing that this year with all these other songs, but it wasn't an album. But you look and there's always, like even Post Malone kind of had a bit of traction, but sometimes certain artists are able to get their songs up to the top 10 and the album bomb just controls and rules the day. But a few of these tracks endured. 9 of these I fell in the top 10 of their second week on the chart. A month later, Future had the song Wait For You, a melancholy hip-hop ballad with Drake and Thames, great song. Only lasting reminder of the blockbuster spurt into the top 10 for Future. And in July, Steve Lacy carved out his spot in the Hot 100, but his song Bad Habit debuted in the lowest possible position, climbed the chart for 5 weeks before reaching the top 10, and remained there for 18 weeks, ultimately peaking at number 1. And that's because of radio. Because radio picked it up roughly, 9-12 weeks later and kept it up there. And then the song will stay into the top 10 for many weeks after that. Songs like Bad Habit are hard to find. 75% of 2024's top 10 hits debuted under the lofty environment of the top 10 as of the 3rd week of July. So there are songs from these albums that can be easy come, easy go. And they don't remain as long as the hits, which take time to get into that exclusive atmosphere. Since 2000, the average single that hangs in the top 10 hangs there for roughly 6 weeks. In contrast, tracks that take 2 to 8 weeks to ascend to that position linger for more than 11 weeks. Radio still controls in that place. That's the whole point. The dynamic has been more extreme in the heart of the streaming era. Since 2015, the singles have stood out in the top 10 the last 6.3 weeks on average. Tracks that take 2 to 4 weeks reach the top 10 last more than twice as long, 12.7 weeks. Again, if we want to explain why that's happening, it's radio. It's because the Billboard Hot 100 gauges radio with a higher percentage of the methodology. And it's not fair anymore. It's an antiquated calculation. When artists with large followings are releasing new full lengths, it's now common for many of the tracks on the album to debut immediately on the Hot 100, as devoted fans engage with it the first time and play it all the way through, sometimes more than once. Now, before I move along with that, there was a time where streaming has made that change now, where all these songs and the methodology is significant enough for streaming to make songs hit onto the Billboard Hot 100, but the longevity is controlled by radio airplay. And it doesn't have to be that way, but it is. Because album bombs always get a drop off unless radio picks up. Now, when record labels and artists used to care about putting out songs, the normal traction used to be you put out maybe a promotional single, maybe put out a first, second, third, fourth single, and then release the album. So there was an anticipation to buy the album, the physical unit, in the store. But streaming has changed that whole methodology altogether. So the music industry, their methodology has changed. Remember, they're not even promoting the radio anymore. They're promoting the streaming. Streaming is clearly the first market. It's the primary market. That's the priority market. And then radio comes in second. A distant second at that. Because the radio doesn't get involved shortly after streaming is starting to go in a lull. It comes in well after it does. Now, listeners have always been eager to devour new releases from their favorite acts, but this activity wasn't trackable on a song level before the adoption of streaming. And then other than sales or occasional radio airplay, courtesy of individual DJs who happen to like a particular album cut. Yeah, and radio used to offer album cuts when they had the opportunity to go and play album cuts. But that's been taken away a long time ago, well before Lee Abrams started programming stations. The initial burst of release week enthusiasm, the thrill of the new is very difficult to sustain. However, many of these songs depart the upper reaches of the Hot 100 rapidly. From 2000 to 2015, this is prior to streaming becoming very popular, 13% of the top 10 songs fell out of the top 10 after 1 week. That number has rocketed upward, topping 40% in each of the last 4 years. So they're trying to say here is that when a song hits the top 10, radio's already on top of it. From 2000 to 2015, radio airplay was already there because radio was on top of it once it debuted, because radio was there to carry the song up to the top 10. It was responsible to get it there in large part. Because remember, it was always airplay and sales. Streaming wasn't even considered and not baked into the cake yet. And that's the problem here. Elias goes on to write that gaining listeners' interest is hard enough at a time when there is unprecedented competition for attention. It might be hyper intensive right now, the competition. But look, I program my own playlist of new music. It's not that hard to go and know that you can have songs that will have standing power. I mean, there was a point where radio stations used to be able to control what songs would be played. It wasn't what the national chart said. It wasn't necessarily where certain songs would just have a certain amount of airplay. And that's when, the big corporate radio giants said, okay, stop playing it or keep playing it. We all had a method. Like program directors individually knew, hey man, when the song started getting out of play, out of favor because we just ran it to the ground, you played it 80 to 100 times a week, then it's probably a good idea to go ahead and start playing less of it or dropping it off the rotation. And we all know how that works because stations have to report that. So the record labels have to report that in general to Billboard. Songs that manage this tend to look like a lot like singles from the pre-streaming era, right? Holding on to the attention for extended periods or building over time may be even harder. But the influence of radio on the trajectory is often especially noticeable. While streams and sales of sought-after projects typically bunch up over a near release date and then diminish, airplay tends to rise over time. And as more stations see a song working and start to play it, they play it more often in tandem with label promotion. But let's hold the horses there, Elias. So let's make sure we clear up what he's saying here. Streams and sales of sought-after projects typically bunch up after a near release date and then diminish. That's what leads to songs making into the top 10. So when you have certain albums that they're sold really well, this is where the Taylor Swift comes into play. Because when she puts out an album, whether it's one of her Taylor's versions or a new album, significant sales, significant streaming. And it stays like that for a while. And then he says here, airplay tends to rise over time, but he doesn't explain how long it takes to get to that airplay. Again, 8 to 12 weeks. That's the average. Now, he says it's in tandem with label promotion. But Elias, let's be clear. We know that record labels they're not offering the artist to go ahead and maybe be featured or interviewed on a radio station. If they're being brought into a city to perform live or anything like that. There's not anything exclusive or any real drops or anything like that that are being done right now by the artist to help promote a track. There's not much of that at all because the record labels are not offering that to the radio stations. They just know that there's a little bit more consistency if an established artist or an artist that becomes established that radio deems established, they'll say, okay, you know what? We're going to give this a chance. Now, some artists will go and come around and maybe they'll do something. Like the thing is, Sabrina Carpenter is an example of a more established artist. And with her label, they decided to go ahead and put her out there in a traditional fashion. So you first heard Espresso. That led off and did very well. Then we move forward with Please, 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 that comes in shortly after. And then Taste becomes the third single, or most likely will be the third single after the album has come out. So she actually gets 2 proper singles before the album comes out. Right now, we have Tommy Richmond, who has not been an established star, but right now he is because his songs have been up there on the chart for a long time. So $1 Million Baby still is lingering outside of the top 10. And it's around this time when you have like a very viral song, when that starts starting to make the drop down, it's going to pick back up because Tommy Richmond's album is coming out very soon. So at the moment, radio airplay is still hot for him right now. 56 million spins for him. Streaming has been dropping a lot. It's 18.4 million streams. So he's well below the half of the hottest streaming single, right? And if you look inside of what he has right here, if I go a little more further into the numbers here, you can see that the airplay makes up 38% of the methodology for him. And then 61% of his methodology comes from streams. And 1% comes from his sales. But right now, the album is going to come out. And now there's a good chance that with the help of radio, you've already had 2 songs come out, right? With $1 Million Baby. Devil is a Lie as the second single that came out after that. Now there's a good chance that 2 proper singles that come out, the label's going to say, okay, we're going to push the album out. And that's the new methodology now. But with radio used to be where we used to have a lot more singles that come out before the album does come out. But they chose not to do that. Not in this case anyway. They talk with Tom Pullman, Chief Programming Officer at iHeartMedia, Corporate Radio. He says, quote, a lot of times the pop format will just look at other formats and see what's bubbling up, like a Hozier or a Noah Kahan. And then say, you know what, that feels like a pop record, let's give it a shot. What are you talking about, Tom? All right. So when they talk about this, what other stations are bubbling up? Who else is playing Hozier and Noah Kahan? They're not. We don't have, the soccer mom stations and hot adult contemporary? Is that what we're talking about? We don't have adult album alternative. We don't have alternative stations, not that many. We look at other formats. Who? Where? Hozier wasn't getting played anywhere. His song was just getting very popular, and it made its way up, and other markets were playing it, and it was a big pop song everywhere else. And all of a sudden, well, I guess something happened where Hozier finally got a chance to get his song played. And it's been up there for a long time. Noah Kahan, I mean, I don't think he was being played on country radio. But Stick Season had such a prominent hit to it, and it took so long for radio to pick up on Stick Season, and they finally did. But that's it. Then you can make something a supermass record. Again, Tom Pullman is saying bullshit right now. It's complete bullshit. A lot of times the pop format will just look at the other formats and see what's building up. No, incorrect. Incorrect. Many young executives believe airplay has little to no impact on streaming levels. You are correct, sir. And by the way, of course, these young executives can't say anything publicly about it. But radio's slow burn timeline helps songs climb the Hot 100 to sustain their position at the top. But no one wants to see it this way. Do you understand this? Do you understand this doesn't work at all? Because we're missing out a lot on this. It's the fact is that you're picking up on the songs. Radio's picking up on the songs when these songs are already kind of dying out. Because of the hyper attention that we have right now of your music listener. Okay? When I have songs that I put on one of my playlists, it's the Mega Miami playlist. If there's any songs I have on there that are pop related or any, either hip hop related or whatever it is, my normal rule of thumb is that naturally, after 12 weeks, I'm probably done with a song. 3 or 4 months, I'm done with a song. I'm moving on to something else. And if I decide to keep the song, I put it into another playlist that has a larger playlist, and it's something I'll go ahead and fall back to because it's all recurrence, right? That's what I do. If I was doing a radio station right now, that's exactly what I would be doing. And some of those songs you might be reading as recurrence and play them once again, but not as much. But it was always that rule. If a new song was so hot 3-4 months later, maybe 6 months, then you drop it. You move on to something else. But in radio now, they don't care because they're just going to continue to go ahead and just have songs that have been up there forever. You're telling me the people on radio right now are not a little tired that Lose Control, Teddy Swims is still up there, or Hozier Too Sweet's still up there, when these songs have been up there for 6 to 9 months to a year? You're telling me you don't think that's something that would be a little bit significantly important? In fact, from a label's point of view, this is one of Airplay's primary remaining benefits as radio continues to face increased competition from streaming services and short-form video platforms. Billboard, you're the only reason why radio still has any benefits at all. I guarantee you, Billboard, if you change the algorithm right now for radio and said, okay, we're going to do what the other markets do, what the official charts does, what, all these other charts do in other countries. We're not going to take the model that we've had before. Illuminate is going to go ahead and change now that we're going to go ahead and make streaming a much more important portion of the methodology. Let's say you break it up to say, let's say now a third. Let's make radio a third of the equation. The other third is streaming. The other third is sales. Let's just do that. And watch radio crumble. What would radio do if that happened? If the charts were relevant to them and media-based just decided, well, we're just going to use our media-based chart. We're just going to do things our way. But we're not going to care about that. The music industry is not going to care about that. You're going to abandon the music industry if you're not playing their songs and not helping them keep their chart positions. If radio wants to still be in business, I've said it before, why don't they work with the record labels? Why aren't they helping in tandem with record labels to get their music out there? Hey, look, I know you can't do payola, but you know what? There was nothing wrong with that before. Not as much as I really thought it was when I think about it at the end of the day. Because before streaming, there was still some payload going on. We know that very clearly. And right now, we know that payload is still happening, but it's now the detriment to independent labels. So only the big labels get to go and play, but not everybody can go ahead and just pay and make some money on it. Like, that's not fair. That's not right. So let's get back to the point of the charts themselves and their methodology. Now, they take Shabuzi's Bar song right now, which is once again for the for the eighth week in a row, non-consecutive #1 song in the country. The song went from number 2 back to number 1 on the Hot 100, dated July 27th. Streams and sales were down 6% and 24%. But according to Luminate, radio listening was up 11%. Because at that point, let me put it like this to you. If you look at the chart right now for Shabuzi, remember that song's been up there 20 weeks. And if we're talking about July 5th, we're talking what, 6 weeks ago? 7 weeks ago? So that would have been around the 12, 13 week mark, because that song did not make its way up to the top until radio started playing it. But radio listening at that point hit 77.2 million in airplay audience. Around 80 million is the largest amount of radio airplay anybody could get. If 80 million spins of radio airplay is going on right now, that means Shabuzi is being played not just on pop radio, but on country radio, on urban radio. He is multi-platforming right now on radio stations around the country. And they're playing him every 90 minutes to 2 hours. Still. And this is what, 6 weeks later? 7 weeks later? Radio bumped it up to the top. But Shabuzi was already up in the top 10 beforehand, and then started dropping off. As we said here, July 27th, the drop was from sales and streaming. It started dropping off. Radio picked it up. It brought it back up, the secondary market. The next 2 weeks, streaming and sales kept slipping. Airplay audience kept growing, albeit at a declining rate. At its third week at number 1, it was 10% up 6% in week 4, and stayed at number 1. Jay Grant, an ARR veteran, says, quote, radio can still very much move the needle. Certainly not as much as a decade ago, but I don't think the fall off is as precipitous as people are making it out to be. End quote. Promoting songs on radio is costly. However, and radio generally plays fewer current tracks than it used to. And that's because radio chooses not to do that anymore. The corporate entity is controlling now to the point that we know that over 10, 15 years ago, program directors, music directors are no longer able to go ahead and choose what songs can make it onto their rotation in their individual markets. No, you don't even have regional music directors anymore. The music directors that take the phone calls now are regional or national music directors. You're now down to a handful of people, maybe a dozen people right now, that will determine what songs will go to radio and be played on the behemoth of these radio stations. But the gatekeeping now of radio is too much. It's corporate gatekeeping. They've caused this to happen. They caused it to cost much more money to go ahead and promote the radio. And it used to be, and when they talk about costly, it's because these corporate radio stations now, they're now taking real payola from these big record labels, because the gatekeeping now is a bigger price, because radio is desperate for money. And radio is desperate to get any kind of leverage. So they're going to do whatever they want. And they're going to be greedy when they could go ahead and open up and be a little more forthcoming with the artists, potentially new with their labels. You know, there's still a point, I never got to meet her, but I remember when I was still working at Clear Channel, when Katy Perry was unknown. And I remember she came to the West Palm Beach market, to iHeartRadio, which was Clear Channel at the time. And I remember I Kissed a Girl wasn't even a song yet, but it was the first single she was coming out with. And all of a sudden, big deal. Like, you know, was it, I think, 2007, right? And the rest is history. But she was a complete unknown. And then all of a sudden, she blew right up overnight. And radio helped with that, because streaming wasn't even part of the picture yet. The internet also was not part of the picture yet. Not even peer-to-peer, really. Not really. Because it was so inconsistent anyway. So promoting songs to radio is costly, however, and radio generally plays fewer current tracks than it used to. It's good for commercially minded artists, then that airplay is not the only way to extend a song's life high on the charts. While the influence of music videos has lessened considerably in the age of TikTok, Reels, and YouTube Shorts, a well-placed clip can still ignite a single. I look at what a number of artists do to get their music up on the charts and get it prominently placed. And right now, it's changed. Like, the anticipation for an album is no longer there because radio used to help create the anticipation for an album, for physical units. But these days, all the artists I see now that do pop, they're all doing clips. They're not doing music videos. And if they are, they're using the music video to kind of reincorporate into clips, or just doing more on top of the music video to get interest in the music. Because I can tell you right now, I was watching the whole deal with Charlie XCX and trying to get her album Brad out off the ground. And, you know, it didn't make the kind of dent like it could have done in the US, obviously, but in the UK, I'll tell you this. She did an amazing job of constantly, before the album was starting to come out, seeing her play in the boiler room as a DJ and teasing songs that are coming across, the dance challenges that come across as a tease of a song comes out. And then a couple weeks later, the song will get released if they're timing it right. And we know this is all really orchestrated well ahead of time. We know that. But still, it is the way they do it where it looks like it's being done right then and there. And then the song Guess, which has a remix with Charlie XCX with Billie Eilish, that song makes a significant jump into the UK and becomes the number one song for a week. And she's the only British artist so far this year to have made it to number one on the UK's on the official chart in the UK. But it was because of what she did right there. But then also, she had songs that made it to the top 10, 365, 360, and then she made remixes of other songs. Also did a thing where she'd have one song and got a remix of it. And Lord's on there, Girls So Confusing. You have that going on. Like her Brat album, you know, it did do very well sales-wise and streaming-wise. But radio? No. Charlie XCX is a bona fide pop star. But she's persona non grata here in the States. They won't play her music. They will not play it. I don't even know why. Her stuff is so good. Like right now, if I look at the media base charts as we speak, you know, it takes a while for all these songs to get to where they are. But as I said, if we look at the amount of time, some of the songs that are here, and they take so long to go ahead and get to someplace. Please, Please, Please right now is currently most listened to song, is the highest ranking song on Media Base's top 40 chart for the week of September 5th. Today, as they posted it, right? Chapel Roan's Falling Now at second place. And then Birds of a Feather, Billie Eilish. Espresso, $1 Million Baby, A Bar Song, Too Sweet, Beautiful Things. I Had Some Help. Those songs all have 15, 20 weeks or more of chart time in streaming. And the one song that's in the top 10 right here now is Madison Beer's Make You Mine. And that is a song that is over a year old. I was streaming it late last year. Song's great. I love it. Madison Beer's awesome as an artist, especially as a dance artist. She just gets it. Song 15 minutes, also a great banger. But one of the things about this is that, you know, dance songs just really don't get a chance to go and get played for whatever reason. People feel like American listeners will not dig dance music for whatever reason. So Charlie XCX has a dance hit. Her song 360 right now is hovering outside of the top 10. There's more to be said about this article from Billboard, but that's the point I wanted to make about this, is that the methodology right now in the U.S., you think we would be trendsetters on, you know, with new music that comes out, it's fractured. American listeners will listen to music through streaming, and radio no longer matters. But there's something to be said about being able to go ahead and listen to music and letting the populace enjoy and embark on the new music that comes out that we're all listening, streaming, downloading, or buying, which is what the official chart is about. Their chart is all the songs you are listening to, streaming, downloading, and buying, or watching. And that chart is much representative. And by the way, when you look at what they're doing right now, Ross on Radio, radioinsight.com, put out a great article about this because he just had to go and listen to stations over there. Because the radio stations now in the UK are putting up some of their best numbers in a long time. Now, when I did research for this, going into this, I made the point to go and look at the radio ratings, and I was looking back at some information of the reach of listeners that they have right now. So in the UK, they have stations that surpass 11 million weekly listeners. Heart Radio is one that's like a soccer mom station, Hot AC. Capital FM, top 40 station. They're reaching an essence of 3 million listeners regularly. The KISS Network, 4.2 million listeners, an 8.5% year-on-year increase for their main KISS station, a top 40 station. Smooth Radio, third largest commercial radio brand in the UK, 5.8 million listeners. As of first quarter 2023, BBC Radio 1, average weekly audience, 7.1 million listeners. So you put that together, over 10 million listeners regularly listen to those stations in the UK out of a country that is 67 million people, and 1 in 6 listeners are listening to not just radio, top 40 radio. So you're telling me that 10 million listeners right now, on average every week, listen to these radio stations. Those numbers would be incredible if possibly, the U.S. radio stations could get the same thing, but they can't. And then also there's more demand to get these stations even more access or more exposure. So there's a national contemporary hits radio network called Hits Radio that's now going to get a frequency in London proper. And they're putting that out there because their rhythmic CHR KISS, which is like a hits and hip hop station or hits and dance and hip hop kind of station, is being now moved to DAB. But the FM frequency for Hits Radio is for Hit Radio. And the Hot AC of Global Heart FM, the Heart Radio station I'm talking about, heavily rhythmic. And what's been happening is they have actually had competition over there. So of these big national brands, Global owns Capital FM, Capital Radio, which is a great station, by the way. And Bauer, who owns the KISS FM format, they've been using their stations to jostle each other for the last few years. And Sean Ross says that in recent years, British contemporary hit radio has sounded consistently better to me than its American counterpart, particularly because of its greater dance music component and thus better energy level. Unlike in many U.S. markets, contemporary hit radio did sound better than its numbers here. But London is still a heavily fragmented market, such that having the existing contemporary hit radio stations in the 4-share range is a rebound. And it is. And they were showing, just if you listen to the music that's being played right now in these markets, I mean, I can tell you one thing. Of the songs they're playing right now, in the 4 o'clock hour, they're showing what Capital Radio is listening to, Capital London, with Will Manning at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And he was sampling this on August 7th. A little bit different than what we're going to have here, but look, of the songs that I could tell you that U.S. Radio would be probably playing, okay, they have a song, Crazy What Love Can Do, that's a recurrent for David Guetta, Becky Hill, and Ella Henderson. Espresso, Sabrina Carpenter, that's a current. Tom Grennan, Remind Me, that's a current. Perry, Forget About Us, that's current. Killer Roy, Girls, is also current, but none of these songs get played in the U.S. Taylor Swift, Anti-Hero, recurrent. Haley Steinfeld, Starving, recurrent. Rudimental, Bring Me Joy, that's recurrent. Telephone, Lady Gaga, Beyonce, that's going back in the crates. Outside of Love, Becky Hill is a current song. I Had Some Help, Post Malone, Morgan Wallen, Senorita, Shawn Mendes, Camila Cabello. They really mix it up for themselves over there on that station. And then Hits Radio, Noah Kahn, Stick Season. You got Valerie from Mark Ronson and Amy Winehouse. You got Lost Frequencies of Colin Stott's Where Are You Now? Ask You Shall Receive, Rita Ora, and Seeks Bye Bye Bye. The song is now back once again because of the fact that the Deadpool and Wolverine soundtrack did so well. That song got back on the chart. It charted in the U.S., but not as high. And I don't know if stations went back and played it again. Ed Sheeran, Shape of You, that's recurrent. Calvin Harris, Eileen's Free, that's a new song. Empire State of Mind. So again, this station as well Middle of the day, this is 11 o'clock in the morning, August 9th, on Capital London, hits radio from Bauer, they're playing a little more, some recurrence, but also during the middle of the day, why not? And then BBC Radio 1 o'clock in the afternoon, Coldplay, Feels Like I'm Falling in Love, Little Sims Gorilla. Coldplay, that's a current song. Not on the chart over here in the U.S., or not in that high up as anything. Met, which is Medi or Bet, that's a dance song, and that's one I listen to right now, and kind of was onto it, and I kind of put it into one of my other lists. I've had it on the list for about 8 weeks or so. Glass Animals, It's Here in Space. Airlock, that's pretty current. Laugh Not Cry Later, that's from recurrent from Drake and Little Durk. Claro, Sexy to Someone, and she's got songs right now, and nobody's playing that over here. Youngblood's Hope for the Underrated Youth. Rudimental and Karen Harding's Bring Me Joy. Jamie X and Robin's Life. Ice Spice and Central Seas Did It First. That's a new song. Wolf Owls, Don't Delete the Kisses. That's pretty current. Back on 74, Jungle. That song just does really well. It's recurrent right now. Don't Call Me Up, Mabel. That's a recurrent. Gracie Abrams, Close to You. And nobody's playing that over here in the U.S. And you would think with Taylor Swift being kind of on top of that as well, nobody's saying anything about it. But Gracie Abrams, her songs are playing in the UK. Nothing here in the States. And she's an American artist. Joel Corey and Tom Grennan, Lionheart. That's a song from a couple of years ago. Please, Please, Please is in here. And See You Again, Tyler the Creator, and Kali Uchis. But like I said, such a different, wide range of music. A lot of dance music out there in the mix as well. And they're playing current songs. And just a better mix. Meanwhile, if you go listen to the American radio stations, they're just playing the same stuff over and over. And it's songs you've heard for a long time, if you're going to catch up on it. And then Jacobs Media, my friend Fred Jacobs, I don't know him, but I'd love to go and interview him sometime. He does research and consulting, and he doesn't always bend to the knee on bashing radio, but he does use his stats to kind of get more information out there to help encourage consulting by him to these radio stations. He pulled out a recent blog called Who Cares What Talent Thinks? And he writes pretty clearly, is what the radio broadcasting business going through right now a result of evolutionary change powered by increasing conditional challenges and emerging technological threats? Or this such a larger and more perilous existential crisis facing the industry where the outcome is not a foregone conclusion? That is, radio may not survive just because it's been around for a long time or because 80% of adults still tune in every week. So which is it and why does it matter? And he goes on and says this is the former. Outside of technological changes like streaming, podcasts, and AI, radio's ability to adapt is very much in play as it uses these advancements to create its own products and services that leverage these new tools. Right. But the other scenario is where radio falls to recover from its post-pandemic downturn as a continuation of a trend that's now a couple of decades old. Digital uses of entertainment and information has now surpassed linear as never going back. And the competition continues to proliferate, bolstered by smart young minds and plenty of capital to support its development. And broadcasters are simultaneously confronted with diminishing resources, human and financial, as they try to muster up a response to a continuing loss of share and relevance. But that's also corporate. Because when they lose, they just continue to go ahead and just cut. And think they can just continue to do that. And they also will hold on to debt and never do anything about it. So he goes on to say that radio can no longer operate on a philosophy hinged on scarcity because entertainment and information options are plentiful and of generally solid quality. While Spotify, SiriusXM, and the majority of podcasts are just okay, they provide variety and choice in a world where radio once ruled, often because it was the only game in town or in your dashboard. Yeah, I do agree with Fred Jacobs right there because you know what? It wouldn't be that hard for radio to put in some good personalities and some good hosts of talk programming, sports talk programming, or some good hosts on the music side that could take away from people going to podcasting. I think they could take a chunk of podcasting away and take it back from podcasting if they wanted to. I really believe that. He goes on to a deep dive on what makes radio unique, habit-forming, and local is the fact that for decades, people from Wolfman Jack to Paul Harvey to Howard Stern, personality is, was, and likely will be the elixir that keeps consumers, advertisers, and marketers coming back for more. or coming in the first place. And if the radio broadcasting industry doesn't develop a system that not only perpetuates and maintains its current crop of stars, but also builds mechanisms for discovering and recruiting future talent, it is indeed screwed. And that is everything you got to know about that. It's really interesting. And it's not like radio can't be redone. Radio is still being done outside of the radio dial, outside of AM, FM, because there are people trying to go and create radio stations now as we speak. Aside from the number of similar services trying to knock off or diminish Spotify, Amazon, Apple Music, etc., more and more retailers are launching in-store streaming radio stations that play music while delivering advertising messages to customers already in the act of walking up and down the aisles and shopping. Yeah, I'll tell you, Walmart has one. Chick-fil-A now has one. They have their unique playlists, and in between commercial messages from their vendors that remind us that there are specials on laundry, detergent, or combo meals. Walmart Radio has a great setup, and they actually have air personalities on there. Same thing for Dunkin' Donuts Radio. Dunkin' Radio, I've heard that when I go in there. Wawa has a radio station in there. It's not outside of the scope that they can do that, but they're running satellite radio basically for themselves and putting their music out there. So Walmart Radio has an actual station. Hell, there was a time I actually was trying to listen to it. I can find the URL so I can stream Walmart Radio if I want to. But yes, there are others that are doing that right now. In-store radio stations. Amidst the cacophony of audio choices, Fred goes on to say that radio stands somewhat alone thanks to its personality component and its ability to be live and in the moment. Yet in recent years, the friendly voices behind the mics are just as likely, if not more so, to be targeted for those now regularly scheduled that attempt to deliver a profitable product to Wall Street while stripping stations and their companies of the soul they sorely need to retain if they are to avoid oblivion. Live radio is being systematically replaced by pre-recorded versions that have never successfully replaced how it feels to hear a live broadcast. Personality matters to radio, maybe more now more than ever, whether radio's powers that be have reached the same conclusion. Let me tell you this too, that the video and audio podcasters have started to learn how to create listener feedback and engagement. Because now the YouTube folks out there or TikTok or wherever, they've all learned ways to prioritize listener feedback. If the feedback is good enough, YouTube has a super chat. So when you go in their chat room and you want to go ahead and get something said on a particular show, whether it's YouTube, whether it's Rumble, whether it's whatever, you can now do a thing where it's pretty simple. Or you can just create your own site and continue to get people to subscribe, whatever it is. But people will easily now create super chats to get their word out there to others. Imagine if radio could do something like that, huh? Imagine if radio could go ahead and create super chats and they can get listener feedback like that. That'd be crazy, isn't it? But Fred Jacobs is absolutely right about what he says when it comes to radio. The music radio portion, radio airplay, as long as Billboard continues to prop them up, they're not going to pay attention to the real problem. Fred Jacobs says it pretty clearly about personality. And you know what? Content. Remember, content is king, and the control of your content is in your hands.